Guys, welcome back to my channel. It is G here. Is it really less racist to live abroad? Guys, I know so many people are wanting to leave the United States, and we hear so many different stories about Black Americans going abroad and experiencing less racism. And I want to talk about that and give you guys some real perspective on living abroad. Subscribe to my channel and let's get into this.
It's never too late to rewrite your story. You are the captain of your life. You choose the path forward, own your life, and steer it according to your desires.
So, if you are new here, if you've never seen me before, I am G, and I have been outside of the United States for almost 10 years. I think I left during Obama's last term. So, it wasn't really a political reason that I left. But I am very attentive of the politics in the United States, and I still vote from abroad. So I try to make sure I am up to breast. I have met several different Black Americans who live outside of the United States who will say that, you know what, living abroad has helped them experience less racism, less prejudice, less of a lot of different things. And I want to say that may not necessarily be completely true. What I have found now, I have lived in Guatemala, I've lived in France, and now I live in Italy, and I hope I won't live in Italy forever. But I have also traveled extensively. I've traveled to places like China and India, and I will say that racism absolutely exists everywhere. Absolutely exists everywhere. And a lot of times, Black Americans, when they are abroad living, there's lots of different ways to live. And a lot of times, as Americans, whether you are a Black American or a white, whatever American you are, as Americans who come abroad, they live, but they don't live within the culture. They live kind of on the outskirts of things. And if you manage to stay on the outskirts of life abroad, you may not actually experience a lot of racialized moments. However, they totally do. And what I have found to be most important is to understand everybody's threshold of what is unacceptable to them is very, very different. I know women who are married or partnered with Europeans, and they deal with a lot of microaggressions in their relationships. A lot of Black Americans, because we have gotten to this idea that Black is Black all over the world, a lot of times when we see interracial relationships, those people of color, those Black people, are not Americans. And you might be like, well, what's the difference? They experience racism just like we do. They might, but their idea about it is very, very different. And how they absorb microaggressions and macroaggressions and all of the things in between can definitely be different based on what they find acceptable. And I have found this to be the case even of Black Americans who come abroad, and especially women who get into these relationships and they're dealing with these microaggressions. A lot of Black women, for the very first time in a relationship, might feel like they've gotten the attention, the care, the ability to be soft and feminine for the first time. And you would think that would give them the ability to not experience racist moments. No, that is not true. I know this woman who is married to a European guy, and she thinks that he knows so much about Black American culture and that he is so sensitive to like her needs and all of these things. The microaggressions and the things that this man says makes my skin crawl. But she actually thinks that it's more reflective of him knowing something. So the same problems exist for all of us if we have not deconstructed or started to deconstruct patriarchy, white supremacy culture. All of these things are inbred in all of us, regardless of our ethnicity. And when I have seen people, and it's not always just women, but when I have seen people who are just like, oh, I've never experienced anything racist or blah, 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 they have just accepted some sometimes pretty heavy microaggressions just because it feels slightly less violent. But I will tell you, a lot of the things that we as Black Americans see that happens in the United States that we consider microaggressions, even small things like walking down the street and white people thinking you're supposed to move, right? Same thing happens here. My partner didn't even know that was a thing. And I was telling him about how I almost punched a lady in the back of her head recently. Recently. And I live in Italy now. You do not escape MAGA types abroad. They are absolutely everywhere. And one of the things that I think a lot of Black Americans don't know because of how our media is shaped in the United States is that the white right wingers are absolutely trying to take out over governments all over the world. It is not just fascism in the United States. It is fascism absolutely everywhere. That's why Germany's government just collapsed. There's a fascist in charge of the government right now in the Netherlands, but that's all breaking down as well. And it's not necessarily breaking down to say that it's going to get better. It's just breaking down. And I think that why things are breaking down the same way they are breaking down in the United States is because there has been a certain level of complacency with the population there. And when people specifically are talking about less racism, you have to put it in context. There's less people of color in most places in Europe, far less than the United States. And the history is very different. So a lot of times Black Americans will be like, oh, because of my passport privilege, I was able to feel like I was exalted a little bit more than you are in the United States. And I am surprised, or I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but it's surprising to realize how many people leave the US dealing with certain racial or racialized things and come abroad and accept similar type of things because it has an accent and a slightly better ideology. Though they blame a lot of things on nationalism, which seems far different and better than racism to some people. But what I find is that regardless of that being true, when I am sitting in a cafe or a bar or I'm walking down the street, no one looks at me and goes, I wonder if she's American or Nigerian or Ethiopian. Like nobody does that. They see you as an African, period. And at that moment, they filter their ideologies about you, how they filtered Africa. And how they teach about Africa here is not that different than how they would teach about it in the United States. If we look at how the governments have dealt with immigration, the whole reason behind Brexit in the UK was related to immigration and not wanting immigrants there. They have the same ideas that immigrants are taking their jobs and taking over things and all of this sort of stuff. Italy is a fascist country. The government is like neo-fascist, and they are doing the same type of rhetoric about immigrants here as you might hear in the United States. There's no way to say it's better. I don't think that we can say that. And I think that a lot of people, when I mentioned how people live, I have met plenty of people here who manage, they don't earn their money here, right? And this is particular to Americans. They don't earn their money here. So right there, you're not involved with how the society and social structure and the culture works. Because if you're earning more money from abroad and other investments or whatever, you're already separating yourself from the rest of the culture. And when you actually start to integrate yourself and you perhaps have children going to school and you perhaps have all of these things that actually put you in direct contact with the people that you have to interact with, the actual locals, you will find a whole lot of bullshit. And one of the biggest differences, especially in places like Italy where they really see Black people as refugees and immigrants that they don't necessarily want in their country, but they have to tolerate. The thing that you will see is that there's no shame. There's absolutely no shame in being racist in most of these countries. There is no one who's going to look at you sideways. There's still no woke white people here. In the US, there are some, and as annoying as they are starting to grow in the respect of understanding that they need to correct their people. In places, other countries, that doesn't exist. There's no white checking another white person to say something you said and did was racist en masse. Most of them either ignore it or accept it because they kind of believe it themselves already. And I would say that the only way that you escape these sort of things is if you're in the country, but also on the outskirts of the culture, and you're on the outskirts of the social norms and interactions on a regular basis. The other thing is, stop listening to the Black people that are somewhere. If you want to go someplace and experience it, definitely go. So generally speaking, as Black Americans and our history, we are far more unaccepting of microaggressions or macroaggressions that might happen on a daily basis. And I think that because some people come and their threshold is so wide, they're not being called the N-word. You won't get shot, for example. Generally speaking, people are less physically violent in Europe, and that's enough for a lot of people. That is absolutely enough. You also have to imagine that the Black people or the Africans who come to Europe, who are first or second generation, Blackness doesn't exist in Africa, right? The concept of being Black does not exist in Africa. They become Black when they leave Africa and come to Europe. And a lot of them don't really understand what that is when they're in these white countries. And so their response to microaggressions and their response to a lot of these things are far different, and their perspectives are far different than ours might be after the generations and the generations of things that we've experienced there. And I'm going to say, I feel like a lot of times, though, Black Americans, when they come to Europe and other places, they are ready to be accepted and they are ready to accept. And a lot of people, and I'm surprised sometimes by how many people really, really are desiring to be accepted by white people in some place, in some form. And this is where they will start feeling like, you know what, they're nice and they're doing all this, to make me feel welcome. Who cares if they touch my kid's hair or they touch my hair, or who cares if they say little weird things. Like, I had this one woman, she's so nice to me. Okay, I can't tell you how nice this woman is to me. She works at a shop that I go to, or I've gone to, and she is the nicest person. She helps. She's so helpful. She is really just she's very kind. And this is why I think a lot of Black Americans overlook things. So I went into the shop one day and I did not have my kids with me. Usually I go in there and I have my kids with me. And so she was like, oh, where are the kids? And blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, they were at school or something. And she's like, oh, yeah. She's like, I forgot the little one. He has started school already. And so she goes, man, I want one of those. One of those. Not, and when she meant one of those, is she was saying like she wanted a biracial child. One of those is what she said. And of course, in this moment, my skin crawls because, again, it's the fetishization of biracial children. It's the not seeing them as humans and saying, I just want one of those to fetishize, to show off in some kind of weird way. And you have all of these things in your head, but she was so nice. You know what I mean? So I just kind of was like, ugh. completely turned off by that comment. And I haven't gone into that store since, right? I didn't say anything to her, but I'm just like, I can't, you know, there's so many things that are like that on a daily basis. And I could spend an hour telling different stories about microaggressions towards me, my children, even my partner, who is a white guy who has experience going out with our kids. And when I'm not with him, people assuming that they're adopted or making weird comments to him, like, oh, he did such a good thing adopting these poor little African kids. So it's endless, really endless. And the only difference is that there is a general lack of violence, and that safety for a lot of us can be enough. But you're going to experience racism, and I think that realistically, the more people of color that start invading, coming to these places, the more racism you will experience. That's why the UK did what it did with Brexit. And that's why a lot of these countries are trying to find ways to limit the rights of the people of color in those places, whether they've immigrated there or showed up there as refugees, whatever it is. Because mind you, if you're trying to leave America, you still have to find a legal way to do that. And the legalities of these things are always changing. No different than the United States. There are people who have been, legally living in countries like Turkey, for example, and Turkey just decided, we're not renewing anyone's visas. You have to get the fuck out. And then you have to find some place where you can go. So a lot of times leaving the country that if you can financially afford it, if you have the means and the ability to do so, isn't always the answer, especially if you're just running away from racism. A lot of places you run to are not that much different, and you don't just get all of the benefits of the things that the people there have. Healthcare, for example. People are always talking about going abroad, having healthcare. You're going to have to pay for your own insurance. A lot of times, to be legally somewhere that you're choosing to be, you still have to pay for insurance. And the doctors might be cheaper, meaning even you don't have insurance, you could go to the doctor, but you have to pay something. It's not going to be free. And truthfully, healthcare is not free abroad. It's socialized, meaning that everyone puts their money into a pot for everybody. And a lot of Americans don't want that, right? They haven't wanted that because of racism. So as these kind of things happen, they will blame your nationality and all of these things. But when I see people say that, no one goes, hi, I'm feeling a little racist, but I need to know where you're from. That has never happened to me. I just get the racism. I just get the microaggression. And when someone's ready to do a racism, they're going to look around for the person that they think they should do it against. And often the first person that they think they should do a racism against is a brown person. And they're not going to ask you where your brownness originated from. In fact, in most instances, people do not see Black folks as American, period. I can't tell you how many times I'd say I'm American, and then it's the follow-up question, but where are you really from? I'm from the States, right? Like, that idea, that thing, people are constantly asking you, even my children who are Italian, by birthright, all of those things, by blood and all of those things. People will see the three of us together and they don't go, well, they think we're all African. In fact, someone just asked me the other day if we were Nigerian, me and my kids, when we were out by ourselves. So they already put a label on your skin color, period. And again, I could actually spend some time breaking down the types of Black folks that move abroad, if that is something you guys are interested in, or their experiences abroad, if that's something you're interested in, let me know in the comments. But I will finish by saying this. I think that we all want to basically live without problems, without being bothered, without like feeling like us showing up in a space is dangerous for ourselves. And by dangerous I mean mentally, emotionally, or physically so. And I will say that being abroad has not solved all of those like racist kind of things for most people. And if you're willing to accept and absorb the microaggressions and they are not fucking with your mental health, which I don't necessarily see how that is, I think that yeah, it might feel a whole lot less racist. I will say that living in Italy, I get so much more frustrated because people are going to gaslight you. And it might not just be white folks gaslighting you, it's like the Africans are gaslighting you, the North Africans are gaslighting you, the Asians are gaslighting you, and you're just like looking at everybody like, what in the entire fuck? like on And it makes you think you're crazy because everyone's like, well, you got to understand the culture, and they're not used to immigrants here, and they're not used to this. They're not used to human beings that don't look like them. And that is no different than the people in the United States who don't want to get used to human beings that they don't want to get used to. And as our world changes and different populations have to go to different parts of the world to live and survive, we are seeing more of that. Unless you are able to recognize the reasons you're somewhere. And this is what I would say a lot of the Black folks that I have met living abroad have already been running. They're already refugees. And these are mental and emotional and sometimes physical refugees. They are trying to get away from something back in the States, which is why so many people are trying to leave right now. It's political right now, but these people who have been trying to escape, sometimes themselves, sometimes their lack of desire to face the things that they need to face in their lives, come somewhere else and they are able to recreate themselves, and that is enough for them to be accepted as this new person that they were able to create living someplace else. That is enough. So they don't experience all of these other things because in their head they're like, you have to understand the mental emotional things that are even required to live abroad, and the things that you have to go through sometimes. It's not easy. So a lot of these people as influencers and creators of content who are selling these ideas, like, let me help you learn how to move abroad, let me help you do this, that, and the other. They're either selling something financially, it's benefiting them, but their reasons and their motivations for going someplace else are always unknown. And I will say the majority of the people that I have met were definitely running. They were running either from something or to something. And a lot of it is to do with their emotional and mental well-being. And I'm going to be honest with you. If you followed me for a while, I told you I manifested living in Italy, particularly when I was like 12 or 13 years old. And when I was 12 or 13 years old, all I wanted to do was run away. I wanted to run away from the life that I had. I wanted to run away from my mother, my father, my abusive stepfather. I wanted to run away. So I manifested that in a period of my life, that all I wanted to do was get away from things and find an emotional and mental safe place. And I just came up with the word Italy because it seems so fucking far away. Um, so guys, yeah, and I I just wanted to share that. I mean, as working through our emotions with the political things that are happening in the United States, I think it's important to have great perspectives and different perspectives on the ideas around moving abroad. So, guys, again, subscribe to my channel and ciao, ciao for now.